Hi, I'm VerBurg. We'll be talking on the topic, raising a child. And I want to say that this is going to be a real delightful experience to be able to sit down with you with this little seminar booklet, to be able to share with you what I would call are some of the most exciting things I have learned through the years concerning raising children. What I would like for you to do is to take your little booklet and just suppose that I'm sitting in the room with you. Now it might be that you are working through this alone as a parent. It might be that you're working through it together as parents. And it could also be that this is a Bible study group or just an informal group. Somehow or another, although we may have never met, I would like to just assume that we are sitting together in the room, and I am going to talk to you through this little seminar booklet. The one that we are working with today is the one, Raising Children. Now, if you will take your booklet and open it to page 1, and as I work my way through, from time to time, I will give you the page reference so that we can stay together. May I encourage you not to lag behind and not to get ahead. This will make it more meaningful to us as we consider our material page by page. First, I would like to introduce some introductory thoughts to us on page 1. It simply says, we live in a universe controlled by many life-giving principles. I would first like to make a comment or two on the whole idea of life-giving principles. It seems like we have gone through a decade where people have pretty well felt that anything that's a principle, a law, a commandment, or anything, that it is going to do nothing but curtail and limit life. That certainly is not true. Life has impressed on us again and again that it is structured by rules and regulations in order to preserve our lives. A very simple illustration, I guess, of this would be our automobiles on the freeway. It's a wonderful thing for me to drive on my side of the road and to know that other people are driving on their side of the road too. I have never felt inhibited that I couldn't go right on his side of the road and face the traffic. So I would like to just emphasize that when it comes to the order of the family and raising children, that we shouldn't just despair and feel like raising a child is an impossible task today. But I would simply like to point out that God has designed some very simple, easy, enjoyable, workable principles which will guarantee us as parents that if we raise our children according to these, it will give every opportunity for our child to find happiness in life. Reading on, these principles are intended to bring happiness into every area of our lives. And I would like to just have us go through that little list. First of all, physically. Now, I don't feel that people have too many problems that the physical laws of life, that in any way they hurt, curtail, or stifle our lives. In fact, the physical laws are good laws, and I think that pretty well people endorse these. For instance, we just don't go walking off a cliff or jumping off high buildings. The law of gravity will bring us down, and of course our frail little bodies can't stand it. There are other laws too when we stop to consider, for instance, in the world of medicine, the world of dieting. These are all principles that God has given, that man has discovered, that you and I follow, that we really enjoy. Now, spiritually, if you are a Christian, you will note, too, that there are certain principles that can certainly induce and enrich our Christian life, and there are also things of neglect that we can do that can certainly curtail and finally just sort of starve us out. Spiritually, we all know we need a good diet in the Word. We need to feast on the commandments of God. Secondly, we also note that prayer life is a communication life with God. And for us to communicate with God means it brings us into a closer relationship, a better understanding of each other. So these are just a couple of the little principles that we follow there. Now when we come to the emotional, which we are concerned with in this particular booklet, it seems that people usually have the idea that when it comes to such things as our feelings, we become the victims of helter-skelter. It's just sort of one of those things that there's really no right way to do it. No matter which way you raise a child, it'll be the wrong way, and this certainly is not true. The principle of emotion is that God has designed us to work. God has put a combination to our personality, which I'm going to share with you very shortly. And if we will follow some of these very simple little rules that God has given, we will find that life just works. Why? Because when God made man, He made him to work. On page 2, I would like to have you note, in each of these principles, simplicity is the key to success. I like to emphasize that point because what I'm going to be sharing with you is very, very simple. In fact, it is so simple that if you don't take it very carefully and take time to see how its design is intended to fit our lives, I am afraid that you will miss it. Simplicity is the key to success. So on page 3, the purpose of this booklet is to show you the basic dynamics necessary for the total life of your child and how to accomplish these. Across the page from this, there are 2 passages of Scripture that just delight me. First of all, in Psalm 127, we have the verse that tells us and reminds us that children are a gift from God, they are His reward. Now, often parents feel that children are a nuisance, something of a plague. Quite often parents bring children into the world, and then it seems to me they kind of regret that they did and wish they hadn't. Sad, to say the least. But note that the Scriptures remind us that children are a gift from God, and we do not give our friends gifts in order to make life more difficult. We give them a gift in order to add something to life. Now, God gives us children in order that we receive this gift of enrichment from Him. And then it goes on to say, they are His reward. God is actually rewarding us for something, and He does it through the beauty of a child. Another passage of Scripture is that according to Proverbs 22, verse 6, God gives a promise. This is not a wish, but it's a promise. It's built on fact. It says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. In other words, he will live it. There's a lot of room for discussion here, and I could give a long commentary on this beautiful passage of Scripture, but I would like to simply put this before you in your mind as we spend our time in this whole area of raising children. And that is, train up a child in the way he should go, and he will do it. To turn it around, if we get an undesirable result from the rearing of our child, we would have to conclude it's because we trained him that way. That's all the more reason why we should be very much interested in knowing, how did God intend that we train a child? The first calling of any man or woman, regardless of their occupation, ministry, or task in life, is that if God has given them a child, the most beautiful, the most serious thing that they can do in all of their lifetime is to raise that child so that that child can be what God intended it to be. A useful purpose in His church and in His service. We'll go to page 5, and we notice that it says there, first let us understand something about a child's personality. Normally we don't talk about the personality of a child, but I am actually going to single it out and show you how it works. Across the page, we make the statement that says a personality has 2 vital parts in it. 1, There's a side of me that has feelings, or often called emotions. On the other side of me, there's the thinking, or called my reasoning ability. In every situation of life, you and I, as well as our children, we feel about it and we think about it. This raises a question: where do emotional problems come from and where do they reside? Emotional problems are not something between me and my environment. Emotional problems are conflicts inside me. In other words, I just can't handle life if I'm having problems. The conflict comes when I feel one way about a situation and think another way and can't resolve the difference. You say, what does this have to do with child rearing? Well, it has this. We have to be very careful as parents that we do not build conflicts in our children, to give them the idea that their feelings ought to always be the top of the world, when in their reasoning and in their thinking they can see that the world just isn't that way. We try to balance this, or we should not give them the feeling they are no good because they cannot achieve. We try to convey to them that in their feelings as well as in their thinking, there's worth to them and there's worth in their life. And the essence of life is not in achievement. It's not in what they can do and can't do. But the real essence of life and the value of life is they are themselves created two ways. In our likeness as parents, they resemble us. And yet, according to Genesis, the first chapter, and the second and third chapter in there, we notice that when God made man, and it's our own children bear this resemblance of God the Creator. What a marvelous thing it is that a child bears the resemblance of God and the resemblance of its own parents. Turn to page 7. We notice that when a child is born, he operates almost entirely on a system of feelings. This is very important for us to grasp, because these feeling experiences that we have in early childhood last a lifetime. Now, if we put bad experiences in there, it means that the bad experience can linger a lifetime. That's looking at the negative side, and from that point of view we can say what a terrible thing that feelings last so long. But now look at it from the positive side. If we put in the feeling life enriching, Christ-centered experiences, these too will last a lifetime. A little more will be said about this as we get into the following pages of the booklet, but reading on page 7, what a child learns by way of his feelings, which we have just said, will be far more lasting than what he will learn by memory or thinking later on in life. Perhaps some of you have taught in Sunday school departments, and you've noticed that the preschool age child is one who takes it in not only by way of his ears, but he also has his mouth open. He just soaks it in. He drinks it in. Then if you follow the same youngster into kindergarten and first grade, second grade, third grade, you notice that this absorption begins to drop off about at grade 3 and rather noticeably at grade 4. It's because, as we shall see, the child begins to shift more from the feeling level or the experiential level of life and shifts more into the thinking level, which means he thinks, he reasons, he memorizes, and like everybody else, he starts forgetting. Thus, childhood is extremely important for the future of the person that will be. Let me illustrate. Now, if you turn the page and go to page 9, I would hope that in this part of the seminar booklet that you would be able to fix this illustration in mind and never forget it. And every time you deal with a child, And every time you try to develop the personality further, I would certainly hope that this simple little illustration would come back to mind. You notice on top we have a line that curves down, and I have the word emotional on top of it. That's the feeling line. Then on the bottom we have a line that bows up, and that's the one of the rationale, the thinking process. Now if you look between those two there, you notice that we have a 0, and then way over to the right we have a 12. And that line in between says this is the age line, and we have a little 9 there. Then on the far left side, where it says percentage, we simply indicate that at the time of birth the child is 99% emotional and 0.01 or 1/100th rationale or thinking ability. Now this stands to reason. Anyone that has ever raised a baby and raised a child or been around children, and we certainly all have, we can certainly attest to this. A child operates on mere levels of emotion. If he's too hot, he cries. If he's too cold, he cries. If he's hungry, he cries. If he has to burp, he cries. And for everything there's a cry, and God has given generally only mothers the ability to interpret what the cry means each time. But the question is, how do you get the emotional down? How do we curve these lines together? It doesn't just happen as a result of having birthdays. No, the parents are rather actively involved in this whole process. You can feed your child physically nutritional foods and develop a good, healthy body. You know that you can deprive a child of nutritional food, and you can take what could have been a strong, healthy body and you can make it a cripple. The same is true psychologically. The only problem is we haven't dared to deal with emotions. Most people, especially Christians, are afraid of anything that's called emotions. And the question is, how are you going to get that line down? How are you going to bring it down so that as he advances toward the teen years and the adult years, that he can integrate these two in life? Because after all, the art of living is where we have these two integrated together, where the emotion is the inspiration of my life and my thinking process makes sense out of it. Well, to bring that line down, I give you 3 small words up there. Ever so small, ever such common language, yet ever so important. The first one is, that line comes down by way of acceptance. Acceptance. Did you ever stop to think, and have you ever observed, that when a mother takes a little baby home from the hospital and is resting in mother's arms, that little baby can tell if mother is worrying, if she's uncertain, if she's frightened, or if she's secure, if she's calm? That little baby can detect that. It's very important to a child to be able to detect that in the arms of the parents, his world is secure. He knows he's helpless. And one of the ingredients in life that is extremely important for a child as he grows up is the part of acceptance, that he feels that the world to which he belongs, first of all the mother and soon the father's incorporated in it, that he's accepted in that world. Not threatened, accepted. What happens when he isn't? That line soars. It doesn't come down. The emotional level stays in a very high pitch. We live basically in a yelling society. Parents yell, school teachers yell, policemen yell, people yell. By and large, in a day's time, if you are involved and walking around where people are involved with each other, you will find that there are yelling people in just about every area of life. What does this do to the emotion? It excites it. A child feels uncertain. becomes anxious. Anxiety rises. As the anxiety begins to rise, he feels threatened, and emotionally he doesn't know what to do. But in a world of acceptance, the emotional begins to lie down. Can't you just feel the way this works? If I shout and yell and scream at you, you become excited on the inside. But if I talk to you quietly and calmly, it brings the emotion down. And as it does, you notice, it brings the thinking powers or the rationale up. An excited person does not think well. A person who is calm is a person who can also think his way through. Bring the two lines together and you mature an adult. Spread and flare these two lines and you disintegrate a person in his personality, and you do, as it were, you scatter life. I must hasten on. Acceptance leads us to love, and love is a wonderful atmosphere that we're going to be talking about in a minute. And then touch, and you know I added touch. I never used to have the word touch in there, and you know why? It's because our society moves so fast, we fail to touch each other. If you ever see an anxious, a disobedient, a little naughty child, it will do more good to squeeze him against your side than to yell, spank, holler, anything else. It's kind of the feeling, here's somebody that cares. How do we bring the rationale line up? And the first thing I have there is teaching. And the point I like to point out there is that teaching is tremendously important, especially from the level of learning it from the parents, learning how to live, learning the things of life from the parents. Our society, again, is so professionally and job and so forth oriented that it seems like first a child has to grow up and learn to do nothing, then he has to go through high school. Following that, he has to go through trade school, then he has to get a certificate, hopefully with a trade, and then he has to learn how to work after all those years of learning how not to work and be content. How wonderful it is that when a child can learn these things, trades and so forth, from the home. No wonder children are more centered on the high schools they graduate from and the colleges they graduate from than the home in which they grew up, because it was at the school that they learned something, and the home basically is not teaching. It says it's too busy. Then there's discipline. I'm going to say more about that later, but let me say this. The word discipline means teaching again. And if we take time to teach our children, the correction of wrong is very, very little and often far between. So actually, teaching, and then pace setting. I added that one because one thing our society cannot do is pace itself. It seems like every time it gets on a kick or every time somebody gets a big idea, we have to burn it out to ashes and find another idea to go on. How beautiful it is when a person can be content with the simple things of life and take those things and just keep them around a long time and keep enjoying them. We must hasten on. We look at page 10. We just went through in the illustration how to bring this line of emotion down and the rationale up. The second thing I'd like to just reminisce, and that is to also emphasize, and that is a child's life is basically shaped by the time he reaches age 9. So many parents who say, well, when my children become teenagers, that's when I really feel they need me. And the truth of the matter is, you missed it. If at that point they have learned how to live without you, they won't need you. God made us with a tie within us to cling to each other. And it's a beautiful tie. The child begins in the womb of a mother. He's attached. When the little baby is born, it clings to its mother. No arms like mother's arms, generally. He clings. Parents often ask me, what do you do to get a child to cling to you? And my answer is this: they were born with that. If they don't have it, stop and think, what did you do to disturb it, that they learn to live without it? At the most, by the age of 12, the shaping process is ended. So by the age of 9, the child has already had his most impressionable and lasting experiences of life. Now the question is, how can we capture these? Turn to page 11, and I'm going to take you through a pyramid. The simple little pyramid. And before we do anything, I'd like to explain the pyramid to you, and I would also like to show you where we are going with the pyramid, namely, what's our goal, and the peak of it is our goal. First of all, you notice on the side of the pyramid we have age 12 on top and we have birth in the bottom. And there's an arrow there. Now, the thing I would like for you to grasp right at the outset, and that is the goal in childhood is obedience, but it's a process of 12 years, 9 to 12 years. Parents who are trying to gain their objective in 2 or 3 years, or in the life of a 4-year-old, is a parent that is headed for trouble later on. It doesn't work that way. We build buildings and we grow trees. Remember, people are like trees. We have to grow them. Buildings are built overnight. Trees are a process of a lifetime. So, don't panic with, how am I going to get obedience out of my child right now? A lot of parents like to brag how well their child is disciplined by the age of 3. And by the time they get to being 13, they wonder what happened. It's they went too fast, and the child never developed. So our goal in child rearing is to teach them obedience and to respect authority. Now, let's turn the page and see how the pyramid develops. On the bottom we have the word touch, because right alongside the pyramid is the word birth. You don't talk to little babies with a lot of words. You do it with touch. Touch is a language best understood by a baby and a small child. In it he experiences the warmth and security of a loving parent, and in it his feeling is, I am safe. I'm going to read along with these, and I hope you just let your mind drift and let these soak in. Turn the page. We add the word love. Love is the atmosphere in which a child can grow up. Love is like the sunshine in the springtime. It encourages plants to grow strong and beautiful. So is it with love between the parent and their children. You cannot force the child to grow up any more than you can force the tree in your front yard to add 2 feet next summer. But you can, with the sunshine and rain, encourage it to grow and become beautiful. The next step in the pyramid is trust. Trust is a feeling within a child that tells him he belongs. Within it, he need not act out adverse behavior to gain attention. I'd like to emphasize at this point that at no place in life, in childhood or the teen years, can a parent win if it doesn't trust its child. As soon as trust is absent, there's anxiety, and the child becomes anxious. As soon as a child is anxious and insecure, adverse behavior comes to the fore. He does it to gain attention, and then the kind of attention and the kind of result he gets isn't what he wanted, and yet somehow or another he fears not to have attention. So trust is sort of a little interacting thing where the parent silently communicates, he cares, he's noticing, he's got confidence in the child, because you see, as we turn to page 19, we add one more step to the pyramid, and that's the step of acceptance. Now, I like to just have you look at the side of the pyramid again and notice that chronologically the child is progressing. You don't gain all these stages the first 6 months of a child's life. The part of trust and acceptance is something that begins to flow more through the child of 4, 5, 6 years old, something like that. Acceptance is a form of communication. Acceptance communicates or conveys to the child that there is room in his life for mistakes. You know, I often marvel at the people that bring children in for counseling, and the thing that they cannot understand is that they are not getting perfect performance out of their children. They just can't understand that, and as a result, they just can't accept them. Well, I often look at that type of parent and I say to myself, I wonder if they've ever had a childhood themselves. Certainly they have. And then I always wonder a second question. I wonder if they're perfect now. It just isn't coming together. I said to a mother one day, I said, if you made the trip from Omaha to Denver by way of Interstate 80, and I said if a highway officer, highway patrol, were right on you watching that you never went over 55 miles an hour. And I said every time you hit 56, 57, on went the red light. He gets out, he kind of shakes his head and says, you know good and well the speed limit's 55, I just have to give you a ticket again. So he writes you up, and it isn't long, you're going downhill, getting a little bit tired, and you go to 56, 57, 58, you get the red light again, you get another ticket. Now, I said if the traffic officer were trying for you to be perfect like we often think our children are supposed to be, and he followed you all the way to Denver, how many tickets would you have? She laughed. She said, a lot of them. And then she said this. She said, I doubt if I would go all the way. I think I would give up. She thought a little while, and then she said to me, you know, I can see now what's happened to my child. Acceptance allows for mistakes. If a child is going to understand and be able to forgive himself for his own wrongdoing later in life, remember this, parents. They have to be able to learn early in life from us as parents that there is forgiveness for wrongdoing. If he can't learn it in childhood, he is not going to know how to handle it later in life. And if you are having difficulty with your children in this respect, in all probability you are having problems with yourself. And it probably is because in your childhood you never had it taught. The result of it being that you are very hard on yourself, and you will never be able to correct it with between you and your children until you can understand and correct this within yourself, which will make life very much easier and enjoyable. Turn the page to understanding. What does acceptance do? Well, you see, it leads to understanding, and in understanding a child begins to experience the consideration of his parents in the experiences of life. I added a line there that I think is very important. Thus he is satisfied to be disciplined for wrong because he was understood and loved in advance. Children respect parents when parents first of all understand them, understand what happened, and then also, if there is discipline, to be honest about it, and at the same time to mete it out as necessary. Remember that discipline has a divine imperative, but it also has divine limitations. And I believe that parents generally forget that. They feel that it's a God sent to beat the life out of a child for wrong, but they do not realize that God has put divine limitations on it. And the last one is where, as he develops into 8, 9, 10 years old, he learns how to communicate. And communication is when he begins to express his feelings and thinking, both, in more or less controlled ways, thus enabling him to begin understanding others and getting along with them. Remember, to get along in the world is something we learn at home. It doesn't happen through blowing out the birthday candles on birthday cakes. This is something that a child learns through the parents. In the next few pages, I will only have time to touch on some very important things that many parents often stumble over and do not understand. I'm going to go over these, and when you finish, I hope that you will go back, discuss everything that we have already covered, and go back and discuss the ones that I'm going to introduce to you now, and make sure in your discussion that you really understand these. On page 25, here are a few reasons why parents find it difficult to love their children or refrain from abusing them. Child abuse is such an issue in our society. Tragic. Really sad that what God gave as a gift and a reward to life, parents across the nation and around the world are struggling with, trying to refrain from, in many cases, maiming and killing them. Let me give you 3 of them that are very common in the counseling room, and I'm sure that these will help, and you'll be able to work your way through others that we didn't have time to cover here. Number 1, reasons why parents abuse children. Parents didn't experience love in their childhood, now that they believe that they have no love to give. And you know, this is built on a false assumption. Perhaps you weren't really loved in your childhood, but remember this. You don't have to keep on living in your childhood waiting for Dad or Mom to come to you and say something like, "I've loved you." It's not going to help you now anyway. Childhood is past. When you find yourself in this place that you feel you have no love to give, remember this. It's basically because you are living in your own childhood. Rise above it. Realize that that's past. You're an adult. Number 2, parents were unwanted in childhood and now can't gain victory over these feelings. There are many children unwanted by parents today who vow in their teens and virtually take an oath to themselves that they are going to love their children someday, that they don't have to go through what they went through. And one day they find that they are married and they have a family and they are doing to their children what their parents did to them. Once again, I go back and say, you don't have to keep living in childhood. Number 3, parents condemn themselves for certain things they do. Children learn these ways. Thus, parents take out their feelings of self-rejection on their child for acting the way he does. Let me put it in real simple language. Things like to use a toothpick at the table or not, to squeeze the toothpaste in the middle or not, and many things like this, to sit at the table with the elbows on the table or not. Depending what your home did with it will make a lot of difference how you're going to handle it with your own children. In other words, if the home built a hang-up in your life, chances are you're still hung on it. Your children saw you do it. They thought this was the thing to do. They did it, and because you are critical of yourself for doing it, you take it out on them. These are just 3 of the basic reasons, the basic dynamics that go into child abuse. Let me go on and introduce other materials that I think you should consider. On page 26, I have some other considerations. Number 1, let me point out that don't always look for the problem between what you as a parent are doing in relationship to the child. Remember there are sibling factors. These should also be considered. That's just plain the brother-sister situation. Children often compete And competition often produces a winner and a loser. And when it gets into the brother-sister relationship, be careful, parents, that you aren't feeding and encouraging this kind of behavior in the home, because it's going to lead to a lot of problems. Another point I would like for you to remember is a child that's going to be a leader is more difficult to raise than the child that's going to be a follower. And you can pick them out at the age 4 and 5 already. The child that's a follower blends in. This child is far less difficult to handle, but the leader is one who's going to get up in front. Remember that while you are curbing the will, don't defeat the spirit of the child. Be a little more patient, a little more understanding. Another point. The child you will find it is most difficult to get along with will be the one that is most like you. Especially if you are not very approving of yourself, you're going to find it very difficult to be approving of the youngster. On the next page, I'd like to give you another point for discussion. Your marriage relationship will prevent 85% of all the discipline problems in your home, for the simple reason the children will feel secure. The little bit that's left is very easy to take care of. I often feel that parents feel if they knew how to handle every discipline problem, they could raise a child. No, they couldn't. You wouldn't have a good child by just disciplining. Put it very simply, you'd have something like a dummy. You haven't taught him anything yet. Not to do the wrong does not imply that I'm doing what's right. So your marriage relationship is very important. My wife and I have experimented with this, and we have seen how quickly children can be upset in our own family, and then we just turn it all back again to the loving relationship that we have in our marriage, and everything calms down. And I would like for parents to really take note that your marriage relationship is a strong, decisive factor in how the children are going to act and respond. On page 28, I like to give you a very important note in closing. And that's the note that says you can correct anything that you have done wrong with your child if you will first correct it in yourself. Children are looking for the right way. You can't correct it by preaching, but example is tremendous. And if you are participating in this little seminar right now, I wish I could talk with you, because the message I'd want to leave with you is this. You've learned a lot of things now that you've been doing right. Now go back and do a lot more of those. You've also learned some things that you've been doing wrong. I've also suggested in limited time how to correct these. Let me say this to you. No matter what you have done, or how bad it's been, or where it's at, between you and your child, remember this, your little child is still waiting for you to change, and just as soon as you do, he will change with you. Don't forget that. Would you like to pray with me? In closing, let's pray. Lord, give us as parents the wisdom to train our children in such a way that they will be able to be all you intended them to be. Enable us as parents to see what we have done right and to correct what we have done wrong. Amen.